Before I begin the video, I just want to take a quick moment to say I've always tried to be incredibly careful when making these videos. These topics can be incredibly difficult to discuss, and it's really easy to upset people without even meaning to do so. I can't tell you how many videos I've put on private or just never published because I questioned some aspect of that video, which is why I've opened this channel to memberships where members would have access to all of those videos along with early access and sneak peeks to my upcoming videos. I might even throw in a members-only live stream from time to time. But if memberships aren't for you and you really want to support this channel, you could always do so by leaving a tip in the tip jar, by clicking on the thanks option, or honestly just hitting the like button because it really does go a long way to help. I appreciate each and every one of you. So with that being said, grab a cup of coffee and let's get into the video, shall we? If Richard Allen went to the trails on the day of the murders and he told a conservation officer as much, I can't help but wonder if he told his family as well. I mean, he felt confident enough to tell law enforcement.
Police had this video to work with, just a few seconds from Libby's cell phone, of a man hard to identify, but with this chilling audio. Family members pleading with the public to review the video and police sketches. Then, a break.
An arrest has been made.
Investigators say they believe Richard Allen is the man in this video. They say in a probable cause affidavit that he told them he was on the trail that afternoon, but denied being involved in the murders.
News about the girls' murders was basically everywhere at the time. I just can't imagine a scenario where their murders didn't get brought up in Richard Allen's house. And if he didn't tell them, did they know where he was that day? And if they did, how could they have seen this image and not thought of Richard Allen? I know everyone looks like this image because it's grainy, but this man really looks like Bridge Guy. He owned the same clothes, he was there on the same day and time. Don't get me wrong, I'm not implying that Allen's family covered for him whatsoever. I just think the details of what he told his family about that day is going to be very significant. There's a lot of details that we don't know and the public is speculating on based on secondhand information or information interpreted through the eyes of the defense team. For instance, what exactly did Richard Allen say during his numerous confessions to his wife and mother over the phone?
New revelations in the years-long investigation into the murder of two young teen girls in Delphi, Indiana. Freshly unsealed court documents allege Richard Allen admitted to killing Abigail Williams and Libby German, quote, no less than 5 times while talking to his wife and his mother on the public jail phones.
Because if you're going to make the argument that Allen felt coerced into making false confessions, the details of exactly what he said become incredibly significant. Because if Richard Allen said things about the crime that only the killer could have known, suggesting coercion at that point requires some pretty serious mental gymnastics. Continuing along that exact same line, what are the exact details surrounding the bullet found at the crime scene and the process used to match it to Allen's gun? Because recently, Barbara McDonald reported on court TV that the bullet found between Abigail Williams and Liberty German wasn't actually found between them, as it was implied to the public, but was rather found days later after the crime scene had been left unsecured.
And one of my court TV colleagues, the brilliant Barbara McDonald, she is a documentary producer here, a journalist for many years who's done great work, especially on the Delphi case, even before you came to join us at Court TV, Barbara, and we were so glad you did. You were hard at work on this case. So if I may start with you in terms of the evidence, what evidence is there that's essentially tying Richard Allen to these crimes?
Well, there's a lot of circumstantial evidence. There are his own statements that he was out at the trails that day. There's some debate about what time he was actually out there and what time he left, which will be significant, but he did say that he was out there that day. Witness statements have described a man who looks similarly to Richard Allen, who was dressed the same way that he says he was dressed that day. I think we have some of the other points we're going to put up on the screen. We also know that some witnesses saw the car that appears to be his car out at the trails that day, and the 40 caliber bullet.
Yes.
The unspent round that was found between the bodies.
Right.
And my understanding is that discovery was made some days after the murder. So when the bodies were found on the 14th of February, 7 years ago tomorrow now, they did secure that crime scene for about 3 days, and they searched it, and then they cleared it for about a day, day and a half, and then they re-secured it. My understanding is that unspent shell was discovered during that second search after the scene had been re-secured.
Now, there's no actual tangible proof that any of that happened at all outside of Barbara's word, and given that she's also the person who presented these inaccurate drawings of the sticks at the crime scene, along with this inaccurate drawing of the infamous F tree, and apparently she had been working on a book about Ron Logan, so yeah, maybe what Barbara suggested is true, maybe it's accurate, maybe it's inaccurate, none of us actually know that right now. But that kind of brings me to my next point, which is that the science surrounding the comparison of ejection markings on shell casings has been challenged time and time again here online. Some people even referring to it as junk or pseudoscience.
The Indiana State Police Laboratory says the marks made on the ejected, unfired round match marks of other ejected ammunition from a handgun Allen owns. Lab technicians made that match using tool mark analysis. Multiple studies backed by law enforcement insist guns leave unique marks on ejected rounds.
The extractor is steel, the ejector is steel. So those are going to scratch that cartridge case as it gets thrown out of the gun.
If you have two identical handguns loaded with identical ammunition, will they leave different marks?
They will.
For decades, tool mark evidence has been admitted as evidence in court cases, but insisting it's not settled science is the Innocence Project. Over the last 30 years, the organization has used DNA to exonerate 375 people in prison and also found
and an analysis of the evidence that caused wrongful convictions revealed that flawed forensic evidence is responsible, at least in part, for more than half of the wrongful convictions.
That includes tool mark analysis.
Well, according to an article that was published by the Arizona State University that I've linked in the description of this video, they said, and I quote, "Microscopic markings on ejected cartridge casings that match the gun used in a crime can provide enough conclusive evidence to land a suspect in the slammer. But what happens if those results are inconclusive? In court cases, inconclusive decisions on cartridge case comparisons can be a contributing factor in putting innocent people behind bars, and the lack of rigorous research in the field of forensic ballistics can keep them there. A new study by Arizona State University researchers may help change that. The study, which was published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, found that 85% of cartridge casings that were judged inconclusive by forensic firearm examiners were actually fired by two different guns. The article went on to say some prior studies either ignored inconclusive decisions while examining firearm identification or inappropriately treated inconclusive decisions as correct decisions. So, to sum up, Arizona State University clearly states that ejection markings can be conclusive enough evidence for convictions. However, it's the inconclusive markings that are the main problem, or examiners ruling inconclusive markings as conclusive. Law enforcement in the Delphi case clearly presented the bullet as having conclusively come from Richard Allen's gun. So, assuming that Richard Allen's ejection markings test was in fact conclusive, to what level of certainty was a test able to prove that the bullet conclusively came from his gun? Was it 98%? Was it 99%? Did more than one lab examine the markings and come to the same conclusion independently? These things are important to know, and suggesting that all ejection mark forensics is junk science is no different than suggesting that all ejection mark forensics is without its flaws. It depends on the level of certainty of the test, and it can vary from bullet to bullet. That level of certainty is an incredibly important detail that we all don't know right now. Continuing with that same logic, was anything found during a search of Richard Allen's home that linked him to the crime? The defense team went out of their way to give numerous examples of things that law enforcement did not find that could have linked Richard Allen to the crime, but they also neglected mentioning some of the other things mentioned in the search warrant in their memorandum. The YouTuber novelist True Crime did an excellent job explaining just that in one of his recent videos. I'll put the link to that video in the description, but here's a clip of what I'm talking about.
I'm also a bit intrigued by the prosecution's confidence. Nick McClelland, Liggett, they seem to have a bit of swag. That might be all for show, but the confidence that they're giving off makes me think that there might be stuff that we don't know about. And obviously, that stuff, if it exists, the defence is going to be extremely quiet about it. They're not going to be filing court documents telling us all the evidence against Richard Allen. They're doing the exact opposite. However, a very interesting thing comes from comparing two documents from the defence, one that they filed themselves and one that was leaked. And by comparing these two documents, I think there might be a little hint inside there. So on page 129 of the Franks document, the defence team starts laying out the evidence that isn't there. They say there's no DNA linking Richard Allen to the crime scene. There's no data extracted from his phones that link him to the murders. There's no data from Libby's phone that connects back to Richard Allen. There's no evidence on his computers. He's not linked to any suspects in this case, other suspects that we've known about. No fingerprints found on the scene and no evidence found on social media that connects to Richard Allen. So they're saying a lot there. But what aren't they saying? What can we learn from the things that they didn't say there? They didn't mention anything about SIM cards. We know there were SIM cards found. They didn't say anything about Richard Allen's home. They didn't put out that blanket statement that there was nothing found in Richard Allen's home. But the biggest one for me is they completely left out Richard Allen's vehicles. Why? Why no mention of that? If you're going to throw all this stuff in, you might as well throw in the cars. And my second piece of smoke is from the leaked index from the defence. This is just an index of how they were filing some of their documents. And under evidence, guess what the first thing that they have listed? Vehicles. Why is that number one here, but there's no mention of it when you're listing out all the evidence in the Franks document?
What were the alibis for the people listed in the defense memorandum? Where were their phones at the time? Was the yellow rope tied to a tree at the crime scene actually involved in the crime? Why did Nick McClelland say it was the state's belief that more than one person was involved? And more importantly, is that something that he still believes? If witnesses saw the killer leaving covered in mud, did Richard Allen's family notice mud on him when he came home that day? Why didn't Richard Allen see Bridge Guy on the trails that day if he was there at the same time? Does video from the harvest store show the killer returning to his car? If Richard Allen was looking at stocks on his phone on the day of the murders, what time was his phone pinging off the cell towers at the High Bridge? I could go on and on and on, but I'm sure you kind of get the point of where I'm going with this. There is just so much in the public that we do not know right now, and the only tangible information that we have is coming secondhand from reporters, or it's from the perspective of the defense team whose sole purpose is to defend Richard Allen. And don't get me wrong, I don't know if Richard Allen is innocent or guilty. I mean, it doesn't look good, but there's just so many unknowns that it's impossible for anyone here to take a definitive stance one way or the other. But so many people have done just that. Everyone's become so polarized about this case, even in spite of the fact that all of us have limited biased information. Which is just so crazy to me, because the details of the Delphi case couldn't matter more than they do. Mostly because there's a very real chance the devil might actually be in them. And with that being said, thank you so much for watching.